Thanks, Steve. Yeah, really looking forward to getting your thoughts on sustainability and the sign trade. So just to kick off, what do you think sign makers can learn from the way that global brands approach sustainability?
I think they can learn a lot, and the reason for that is twofold. I think wherever those global brands and retailers go with their sustainability, their designs and what they're asking for, the rest of the world does follow. It might be a little bit of a lag. It might be 6 months. It might be 1 or 2 years. So they sort of drag the whole industry along with them. So if we're seeing changes in sign and display within big global brands like, I don't know, if you're talking M&S or Tesco's or wherever you are in the world, big brands, what you then find is the smaller ones will follow at some point. And I'm always mindful of the sign and display industry that when I'm talking either at talks or whether I'm doing training sessions or when I'm working directly with them, people say to me, Steve, I don't deal with these big brands and retailers. I only deal with small local companies. What we are seeing is those small local companies are now being asked, and demanding more from those local sign makers as well. So I think what we can learn is just follow their lead. We're passionate about what we do in the sign and display industry. We see it as we're driving around. We go, out to shopping centres and we all shop. We're all consumers. So as a sign maker or display company, I would turn around and just say to them, look, follow the lead, look at the trends, look at what you're seeing when you're out there and try and adopt that into your practices as you go forward, because it will sort of future-proof you when you get asked that question by someone who's either local, might be a local authority, could be a sporting event. It doesn't have to be a global brand or retailer. But definitely follow those trends. That will definitely help you moving forward.
Oh, that's really interesting. And where do you see some of the biggest sustainability gaps in the signage and display world? What are you seeing there in terms of areas need addressing?
I would say, yeah, that's a good question, Debbie. I think there's two areas. I'm going to take design out of it for the time being, because I don't think there's anyone better in the industry than the sign and display companies we have. They're experts at what they do. They're experts at manufacturing. I would say there's a gap in materials and material knowledge, and that's not their fault. It's not the sign and display company's fault. I'd actually lay it at the feet of maybe the material distributors, that they've got so many materials. How do they sell them back into the sign and display sector? I think they're maybe missing some of the key benefits and the benefits of why you would use them in a sustainable way, because just lumping the word, this is an eco product or a sustainable product on the front of a material doesn't really help the sign or display company. They need to know why they're using it. Is it because it's more lightweight? Are they moving away from a certain material? Are they replacing a material? So I'd say definitely material knowledge is a big gap. But I think that is easy to overcome. I think I would just say to people, collaborate with your material suppliers more than you've ever done before, because they are the material experts. You're not. The sign and display company isn't. They are experts in what they do, but collaborative approach is better. So be really, really close to your materials supply chain. I'd also say training. And what I mean by that is the knowledge gap that there is where do you even start if you're a small to medium size sign maker? So I definitely would say to people, wherever you are in the world, try and find your local sign association, see what courses that they do. Obviously go online and do as much as you can, attend any seminars you can. But training is definitely an area where I'm seeing I'm doing more with, and people are coming to me more and more with questions around training. Training's sort of like an old word, really. It's more about their learning and their development and their knowledge. And I hope this doesn't sound too poncy. It's sort of like a transfer of knowledge. I've been in sustainability for 20 years. I started off in the sign and display industry. I'm hugely passionate about it. So how do you get knowledge from someone like me into the industry? And sometimes that can be very, very difficult because, as we all know around the world, most sign and display companies are smaller, maybe family owned, maybe 5-person and below businesses, maybe 10-person below businesses. It's very, very difficult to take time off, go and do some learnings and stuff like that. So just to summarize, definitely material gaps in knowledge, and definitely there's a training gap, I think.
Yeah, because then it sort of de-risks the trying something new. If there must be that sort of fear factor. If okay, will it work as well? Will it be as aesthetically pleasing? So with that knowledge, then they can sort of de-risk those fears to some extent. Would you say?
That's a great summary, actually, Debbie. You actually said it better than I did. I think you're right. I think you've got to overcome those fears because it's their business, and if they change materials or they change a design, is it going to fail in situ? Is the customer going to be unhappy with it? Are you going to play around with the longevity of life of the product? Of the sign or display. So they can't risk that because they're risking their reputation. They could also risk the contract. So I absolutely know and understand that when you do make changes, you've got to make them for the right reasons. And but one thing I would then say is, act as a hub of innovation and a hub of change. Get some new materials in, trial and test them first, then take them back to your clients and customers and say to them, hey, look, this is something new I've done. I'm trying it. Are you interested in this? What client wouldn't be interested in something new and exciting and sustainable? It's just having that fear factor and just taking that step forward where companies can have a little bit more, let's say, confidence, where they could then take that back out.
Yeah. Wow, that's so interesting. And what about packaging waste? Is there a way that suppliers can reduce their packaging waste without risking damaging the product?
Yeah, this is always a really, really difficult one, Debbie, because I say we, as if I make anything, I'm just saying we as an industry, because I love it, is we make beautiful things. Even if it's a light box going on the side of a fish and chip shop, it's still lovely and beautiful. They've taken a lot of time and effort. There's a lot of materials going into it. You can't just wrap it in brown paper and wrap it up in a bit of string and send it and just say, wow, look, I've got sustainable packaging. Because if that's damaged, you've only got to get, if you send 20 out and you get 10%, 15% damage, that's a lot of time and effort and work you've got to redo. So there's a fine line between making a beautiful sign or display and then wrap it in reams and mountains of plastic and polystyrene and boxes and stuff like that you look at and you think to yourself, the ratio is out of sync. Now, there are some huge advancements out there when it comes to different materials. There's now fiber bubble wrap. Who thought there was going to be a thing, something like that? You don't even have to use plastic bubble wrap anymore. There's paper tapes and fiber tapes. There's now these honeycomb boxes that you can start to use for void fills. And I'm seeing innovations within company. I was at a company up in Leeds, a sign and display company, that takes all their old boxes and delivery boxes that they get in, they put them through this shredding machine, and they use all of the boxes and packaging that comes into their business with all of their materials as void fills and packaging materials for when they send it out. So they're saving money on packaging purchases. But when that material or that product or sign gets to the customer can then recycle it if they want to in their standard recycling bins, or they can even take it back once they've installed it as well. So I'm not sitting here telling people that they must move over to this, simple fiber-based materials when they could damage what is a highly skilled, highly made product that could be very high priced. So there's just a balance between, not over packaging it. Because again, if you over protect it and over package it, that's your cost. So you're paying for it.
The cost element as well. Yeah.
To do it as well. So I would just say this is so simplistic, is obviously do enough to protect it, because you don't want to damage it, but don't overdo it, because in the customer's eye, when it turns up, they're thinking to themselves, what a load of old waste that is. Mountains of plastic and boxes and stuff. So that's the only thing I'd say is and going forward, with all due respect, legislation is going to also catch up with us here as well, because legislation is going to start to look at packaging and packaging waste as well. So the sign industry and display industry is not going to be immune to these sort of legislation that's coming down the line from not just the UK or EU. We're seeing it across the world.
Globally, yeah. Wow, okay. And just thinking about aluminium, which is, supplied by Sign Trade Supplies, is a standard and long life solution within the sign industry. How important are durable materials like that in reducing environmental impact? What's your thoughts on that?
It depends where you are. I've got a really big opinion on aluminium and particularly
Okay.
steel, which I'll talk about in a moment.
Okay.
But if you divide a sign and display companies up into two areas, you've got your temporary signage on one side. So if we just take that away for the moment and we just say you've got your temporary stuff, that probably is going to be made from
Mm.
some form of PVC, polypropylene,
Mm.
plastic element that end. We go to this other end where we're talking about aluminium, we're talking about steel, we're
Mm.
talking
Mm.
about rigid plastics like acrylics.
Mm. Oh
They are
yeah.
inherently sustainable. And
Right.
don't let anyone else tell you anything about it, that they're not. Now, admittedly, aluminium and steel has a really, really high embedded carbon because they have to take a lot of energy and a lot of materials to make them. However, they're not temporary products that can be thrown away in a week. We all see beautiful signage that's been up for years, 10 years.
Mm.
The light box might be up for even longer than that, and all you're doing is changing the fascia on and off of it.
Mm.
So inherently, the sign, the semi-permanent and permanent side of our industry is more inherently sustainable than people think because they're using the right materials for longevity of life. And then at the end of life, whenever they're taken down, aluminium and steel is going to be recycled all the time. And just to put a figure out there, I saw the other day. I don't know it for aluminium, but I think it's as high as the steel. 97% of all the steel ever been made in the world ever is still in existence,
Wow.
and that's because
It's
we
incredible.
globally were set up to recycle aluminium and steel time and time again. I think if you buy aluminium at the moment, you can even ask the aluminium manufacturer how much percentage of recycled content is in aluminium. It can vary 40, 50, 60%. Same as steel. Steel has recycled content in as well. So to answer your question, I look at it and go, those materials are inherently sustainable purely because at the end of life, they are inherently infinitely recyclable.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's great to know. And how about design for disassembly? How can that help in reducing signage waste?
I think in the past we've made things, and this is not criticism of the sun display sector at all. It's just that the whole world has lived in a linear process of we make something, we use it, we throw it away, you know. And as we move now into a more of a, we've gone through this recycling model into a new sort of like circular model they call it. And what they mean
Mm.
by that is can we bring materials back and reuse them? So if we were taking off, say for instance, a light box, you know,
Mm.
or a large, display, our shop fascia or something. Is I've seen it already that people are starting to reuse LEDs. They're starting to use the adapters and the ballasts. They're starting to reuse, trays in a different way that they used in the past. So it's not just being sustainable or being sort of like, oh, I'm going to jump on the bandwagon. This is also about cost and economics. If you can reuse certain elements, if we're saying that LEDs can last for X amount of 100,000 hours or something like that, and they're still useful. Can you reuse them again, or are you just going to throw them away? Now, I think sign makers and display companies are more savvy than that. They know what they're doing. They know these materials are expensive. They know the things that they can reuse. And I think, personally, we do design for disassembly more than we think we do. We just don't think we do it. And you've only got to go into a sign shop and you see what people are doing, and you actually realise that these companies have been doing it for years. It just hasn't been
Yeah.
on the radar, and we haven't flagged it as something that they
Yeah.
do.
And
But
it might have been for those different reasons that you talk about for cost or economics.
well, do you
Yeah, it
know what,
wasn't
Debbie?
necessarily sustainability, but it just happens to be. Yeah.
Yeah, and Debbie, look, let's not always go on the sustainability front. If you are economic with stuff, if you reuse things, that's sustainable anyway. You're not doing it for sustainable
Mhm.
reasons. You're doing it for economic and good reasons. If it's sustainable, great. At the end of the day, we need to make money. We need to be profitable. We need to grow our businesses. And ultimately, if you can combine all of those things and be sustainable, then that's really the best path to take. But I think design for disassembly could be better. We could maybe look at maybe
Mhm.
not gluing stuff together as much as we and sticking
Right.
stuff down. We could be a little bit more intelligent in the way we do things. But you know what? There's companies out there who are doing it already. And if you're not
Mm.
doing these sorts of things, your competitors are. So I would
Mm.
just say to companies, really have a serious look at what you do, because your competitors are doing it.
Yeah. Would it be another area that would come under regulation and tighter control as well, do you think, in that area?
I think so, Debbie. I think,
Mm.
the old ways of just throwing stuff away and
Mm.
having a great big skip out the back of someone's sign shop, display shop, and you just filling it up with
Mm.
loads of crap that you've taken down and thrown away. I think those days are over.
Yeah.
And let's not get away from the fact that everything you put into a skip at the back, you're going to have to pay for, and those costs are going up as
Mm.
well. Now,
Yeah.
obviously, I do appreciate you're not going to put metals and stuff like that, because you have mechanisms to take that away and be paid, and be paid to take it away as well. But the days of just filling up skips full of rubbish and it being taken away, I think, are limited.
Yeah. Gosh, so insightful. We talked a little bit about packaging. What about transportation? Are there some simple ways to cut emissions when you're transporting signage materials or signs?
This is a tricky one, and the reason why I say
Mm.
a tricky one is that I can't tell you the company, but I did some work with a company who had a big fleet of vehicles. This was in the UK, a massive fleet of signage maintenance vehicles, and they were looking at this whole fleet. Talking 40 odd vehicles out all day delivering signage, updating signage, maintaining signage, and they were looking at ways to go to EVs and electric vehicles, which didn't
Mm.
work because the range wasn't good enough for them. Um,
Right.
they actually ended up looking at weight and trying to
Oh.
strip out a lot of weight when it comes to certain
Mm.
elements, because obviously once you reduce the weight, you reduce a lot of,
Mm.
you can obviously the energy to transport it there. Um, we also looked at things like flat packing, so we were looking at different areas of elements. Obviously a lot of signage is a lot of permanent signage is a lot of air. There's always a lot of voids in it. They're always big. They're always great
Yeah.
big sign trays, and there's always lots of gaps in stuff. So,
Right.
it's different when it's temporary, on the temporary end of our industry. So, I would just say the biggest thing you can do is lightweight things. Do you have to do it the way you do it now? Can you lightweight it? Can you put more on a truck? Can you be more imaginative when it comes to, packing things together on pallets, or how you ship them? You know, but I do appreciate that if you're putting up a huge, great big petrol gas station sign that has to go on the back of a low loader, there's not much you can do about that.
Yeah.
It needs to be taken there. It needs to be craned off, and it needs to be put on. Or if you need to go on the top of a great big cherry picker to put a sign up, a big illuminated sign on the top of a building, there's not much you can do about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Great points. I think we've touched on this a bit, but in terms of logistics, um, any ways that you think logistics can be optimized to lower environmental impact?
Like I said before, with this company I was doing some work with, they looked at route planning really in depth. They made sure that they were not driving all over the place, and losing mileage, because obviously, petrol and diesel is expensive, and vehicle maintenance and the wear and tear on their vehicles was expensive. So they had a fantastic navigation system that made sure that they were going to the right place at the optimum times to do it. Now, I fully appreciate that if you are a small sign business and you've only got a small fleet of trucks, maybe just 5 or below, or even 1 or 2, then really that's not really applicable to you. You're responding to your
Mm.
clients wherever they are. You have to go and install when you need to go install there. Um, I could sit here and tell people to move to EV vehicles or move to hybrids and stuff like that. Of course, that's the right thing to do, you know. But if you've got a 600-mile journey and you've got a commercial vehicle van that can only do 250 miles, are you going to be stopping off twice on a journey to recharge your electric vehicle? You're not. I'm sorry. The time
Mm.
is money, and not do that. So I think the industry of vehicles has got to commercial vehicles has got to catch up sustainability. And I think until that time, the sign and display industry lives in a world where unfortunately we've got to ship a lot of stuff about. Some of it is heavy and some of it is bulky. And unfortunately, I think without sounding on the temporary end of our world, I would say yes, you can flat pack, yes, you can lightweight, yes, you can optimize the way you do things. But in the semi-permanent and permanent side of our business, I think it to be very, very difficult to have sustainable benefits from that in the short term.
Yeah, and that leads us on to how do you think sign makers should talk about their sustainability efforts, their ESG efforts, without greenwashing to their customers and publicly? It must be something that you come across a lot. Have you got any advice there for sign makers?
You're right. I come across it a lot because the world's changing when it comes to making statements about on sustainability in Europe. Um, we've now got the Green Claims Directive, so the GCD is now come into force. And what the Green Claims Directive is basically saying, and you might have heard the word greenwashing, like you said there, but the Green Claims Directive deals with greenwashing. And what greenwashing
Right.
is, in basic terms, is basically using misleading terms, or unsubstantiated terms to mislead people or the public.
Mm.
Now, there is a fine now in Europe if you make a misleading claim under the Green Claims Directive and you get found guilty of making a claim that's misleading, that's 4% of your turnover.
Wow.
Now, 4% of a small sign company is not a lot, but that could be your profit for the year.
Yeah.
Could take you under.
Yeah.
If you're dealing with a major global brand or retailer, does that major brand get fined because they've used the terms that you've used in your, and so 4% of L'Oreal or Procter and Gamble is big money. So
Mm.
I think I get asked this a lot. So there are going to be words as we move forward that are going to be sort of like phased out and frowned upon. Words like eco and green, they don't mean anything. They don't mean a thing. Even the word sustainable is under scrutiny because what does that actually mean when it comes to?
Mm.
So what they're asking for is keeping things simple. So to answer your
Right.
question simply is keep things simple and keep things accurate. If you're going to say something is recyclable, don't just say it's recyclable. Is it 1% recyclable or is it 100% recyclable?
Mm-hmm.
Is it biodegradable? Well, biodegradable could be 1,000 years. So is it 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, or 10 years? So
Right. So it's quantifying it is really
you're
important.
spot on, Debbie. So it's more around substantiating the words that you use and
Mm.
moving away from words which actually are meaningless. Eco and
Yeah.
green, don't even use it.
Yeah.
So to answer your questions is I would just say to people, keep it simple, don't overpromise anything, and
Mm.
just start off really, really at a low base. You use loads of aluminium, 100% recyclable at the end of life.
Mm.
Steel, look at the plastics you're using. Make sure you get the statements from your material distributors and material manufacturers so you can take their statements and then you use them. Don't make them up. Don't think I know this, I'll write this up. Use their
Mm.
statements because then you can use those documents or materials handling sheets or data sheets in with your, I don't know, you might have a tender, you might want to go and see a local authority or a company. Take them along with you with a sample and show them and say, this is what it is. So use your supply chain partners to help you with your sustainable communications. Don't make anything up because if you make something up and you get caught out with it, the fines could be, and the fines are happening already. People are asking to take the Competitions and Market Authority in the UK and the EU has a similar one in Europe. And I'm sure whether you're listening to this this will be in North America or South America or Australasia, um, that legislation will catch up there. And we're starting to see it already where people are being asked to take things down, advertising down, fines for making misleading statements. You've only got to go onto the Competitions and Market Authority's website and look at the latest brands and retailers who are being fined, and it's actually quite shocking. And their advertising campaigns we all know about. So, say for instance, we're putting stuff on the side of vehicles, vehicle wraps, shop fronts, advertising hoardings. Now, we might look at this and turn around and say, well, if it all gets banned and have to reprint it, we will get all new jobs. We will get another round of print, but that's not sometimes the case. It could be bad for reputation as well for us.
Yeah. Okay. So for those bigger companies that have procurement and marketing teams, how do they work together around sustainability? Because of course, those points that you just raised there would be very important, for a marketing team, and procurement will want to be, making sure that everything's quantifiable and
Yeah.
proven. So how do those two work together? Where do they need to collaborate on those areas?
Another good question, because we always find that procurement lead the conversation, and the reason why is in the past, procurement have been the people that have on either side, could be client side, could be your procurement teams, and they've always driven the cost, the functionality, the specification, and we've all been there. We've all woken up in the morning and someone's turned around and said, "I want that sign, I want that display, and I want it cheap." You know, why? Because the procurement company I'm dealing with has just said, "I'm not going to be paying X for it. I want Y for it, and it's 20% cheaper." And by the way, they want it for Monday. And it's like we've all been there. But what I will say is, what's starting to happen now is in sustainability is there are new sustainable stakeholders within businesses that are different from procurement. So we're now seeing senior managers, CEOs of businesses starting to ask questions around, well, what is the carbon footprint of all this displays we're going to be putting out? Because they might have to report on it.
Right.
So then you come under them, and then you've got senior managers. Now you've got a new breed of sustainability directors. Now, a few years ago, we never had them.
Right.
And what we're tending to find now is those sustainability directors are bright, new, young, educated things that are coming out of universities. So you've got some fantastically educated females and male sustainability directors who really know their stuff. So they're starting to then push this down into things like sales and marketing teams, HR teams,
Right.
and then it comes all, and
Going
then it comes down
throughout
to,
the organization.
yeah, you're right, and
That's
then it comes down to logistics teams, and then it's
right.
procurement. So we're finding now that people are making decisions that turn around and say things like, yeah, it is cheap, but it's not very sustainable, so I don't want to do that. And the
Right.
procurement
Okay.
person is now having more KPIs and measures on them before, which is not just cost. Where before it was just, I want to get something cheap, because I'm sorry, that's the KPI of a procurement person. They've got to save
Right.
money, they've got to optimize costs. But now they're thinking to themselves, well, I can't buy that because it's cheap, because actually it's really unsustainable. So now I've got to have a
Right.
different conversation, because now I've also got to report up to logistics teams, could be waste on that, how's it going to be packaged? It then comes up to the HR teams, who turn around and says, well, who is this signage company? Have they got any diversity and inclusion objectives? Are they have got any females working in their business? The world of sustainability now is really opening up to,
Very
it's
broad.
not just about using a bit of material and you saying we're sustainable. I think we're going to be under scrutiny more than we have been in the past.
Yeah. Wow. And that brings us on to the next big question, which is the trends that you see over the next 5 years. I mean, you've alluded to a lot of different areas there that you can see happening into the next 5 to 10 years. But are there any other areas that you would say, really need to watch out for these areas under sustainability?
Yeah, good question, and good question to sort of like end on, because it's always good to have a future look at the end and see what's coming
Yes.
over sort of like over the hill. I would definitely split it into two areas. I definitely would split it into your temporary signage at this end. I would say material development and material changes are going to hit this sort of temporary end real hard and in a real good way. We're seeing now like waterproof cardboards. We're seeing fiber-based materials replacing plastics more than ever. Hey, look, I've been banging on about sustainability for 20 years. I'm more passionate now than I've ever been, because now there are real, true alternatives. You don't even have to put up self-adhesive vinyl now for outdoor applications. I saw some stuff the other day from a UK distributor that has an outdoor durable life of 6 months for a self-adhesive fiber-based material. So you don't even have
Wow.
to put plastic outside. I'm now seeing waterproof cardboards and boards that you can now put outside for 6 to 12 months. So,
Wow.
and internally, the move away from plastics is huge. Honeycomb boards, fiber boards. So the internal signage and internal displays, I think, are going to be under the biggest acceleration of trend development in materials and in design than we've ever seen. And that's accelerating. There's more materials out there now than there's ever been. I get asked all the time, and I'm really passionate about materials. So I love
Mm.
that whole element of innovative new materials. If we then move on to the other side, I think that's going to be slower. LEDs are always going to become longer life, more energy efficient, those sorts of things, how you run them to save electricity, to save money. That's what it's about. But when it comes to big signage, I don't think there's going to be a huge amount of innovation. Fascias materials, they've all been changed from PVC to screen
Mm.
banners to over to polyesters and stuff like that. I think there will still be some development in the materials, like I said, with temporary. But I think big signage is going to be slower to innovate because there's not a lot to innovate. I've got to be totally honest with you. You're looking at big sign trays and big, acrylic pieces. They're all inherently sustainable because they're recyclable. I think the massive innovation is going to be internal signage and internal materials usage and a move away from plastics. Unfortunately, hello, I'm not anti-plastic. I'm not anti-plastic. I'm
Yeah,
not pro-fiber. Because I'm just an advocate of using the right material for the right job, which is functional,
yeah,
and to get the job done. But more and more brands and retailers I see now are moving away from plastics internally entirely. You're
hmm,
talking everything from, you know, floor graphics to window graphics to flags and banners to hanging materials. All of those sort of boards and display boards. They're all changing at a dramatic rate of knots. And if you're not understanding where that goes, your competitors are, and you might wake up one morning and lose your biggest client because you haven't adopted the latest trend in new materials. Because trust me, all of your clients are going to be under pressure at some point about the materials that they use.